resend that, submit that. If there's any amendments, I don't know yet, and the mayor has to respond. And then it comes back if there's, if he knows it's not a special meeting, it'll be another meeting. If he vetoes any of the amendments, then the council has to go back and revisit those and see if they have, and then vote them up or down. With 6 votes, I have 6 to override the veto. So you get my emails
Yes.
from the middle of the night.
Yes, I did look at the time. It's like, Mayor, 3 o'clock in the morning.
So I want to make sure you got them all, though.
Yeah, very helpful.
But, yeah, so you might need to, again,
Yep.
sit down and kind of just walk through the papers. All right?
Yep.
Have time?
I don't know, we'll have to touch base after this.
Okay.
All right. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I'm not sure if any others will be joining us, but we have a committee meeting, finance committee meeting, joined by Councilors Nave and Hogan. And basically, as we get ready to prepare our budget for the year, we just wanted to get an update on ARPA. And so we have Jen Tift with us to give us a little bit more information about that. I'll just turn it right over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Williams. Good morning, everyone.
Morning. Hi.
My name is Jen Tift. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the city, and I'm happy to share an update on our ongoing progress with spending our American Rescue Plan Act allocation. I did send a memo to all the councilors, I believe, at the end of March, which provided an update as of that point in time. And I brought a one-page update today, which is the large document in front of everyone. That includes even more current data. This is all as of last Friday, just to kind of give you a sense of, again, kind of the ongoing progress. So I'll say a few words about our American Rescue Plan Act programming to start, but then really open it up to questions, whatever questions you all might have. And I should have reminded all of the counselors that, you know, this morning we're here to put the fun in ARPA funding, and so maybe more folks would have showed up, but that's okay. You all and everyone in the room gets to have this fun with me. So we have been at implementation of the American Rescue Plan Act allocation from the U.S. federal government for 2 years and 10 months. I know it doesn't feel like that long because time flies when you're having this much fun. But we were allocated more than $123 million, which I'm sure everyone is well aware by now. We have, as of right now, just under $110 million of that money obligated and about $94 million fully spent. So that's about 89% obligated and 76% spent. As a frame of reference, I actually did some comparisons because the U.S. Treasury Department publishes actually quite a bit of data. And compared with other municipalities nationwide, we've actually obligated 4% more of our allocation, and we've spent 9% more of our allocation. So, compared with other local governments, at least, we're doing pretty well on that regard. We've used our funding to support 11 city departments, and we've replenished more than $42 million to date in the city's general fund with this money. And we've basically used the funding to implement 66 discrete projects to achieve goals related to supporting children, families, and neighborhoods, bolstering our local economy, building new or improving existing infrastructure, and making city government more resilient and more responsive to our constituents. Looking forward, we're proposing, as a part of our fiscal year 25 budget, to allocate any unobligated ARPA funds at the end of this fiscal year to the general fund. We'll use this money to pay for public safety salaries, and the effect of doing that will essentially mean that by the end of the first quarter of fiscal year 25, we will have fully obligated the $123 million plus allocation from Congress. That basically reduces our risk to zero, that we will not obligate this money by December of 2024, which is the federal deadline. And then what we'll do is basically create a special object in that same amount, which the projects that haven't yet been able to obligate their funding will be able to tap into moving forward, so that we can still accomplish all of the intended results from those projects and programs. But for those projects, at least, then some of the federal deadlines and requirements won't apply anymore. So ultimately, the city will have more flexibility. And if, for example, one of those projects or programs ends up coming in significantly under budget, we don't have to send that money back to Treasury, for example, because that will just be the city's money at that point. So it really minimizes some of the risk associated with programs or projects that are maybe a little bit more inherently risky, in particular because some of our projects do have an awful lot of dependencies on external parties, which makes it a little bit harder for us to obligate funds in a predictable way. In addition, we've got about 28 projects that are now completed. Another 29 will be fully completed by December. So we're anticipating only carrying over, past December of 2024, about 9 projects. Those had planned completion dates in 2025 or 2026 when they were initially authorized. These are projects, of course, like the infill housing project, which is intended to take a few years to be fully implemented, lead remediation, and those types of programs. And then I'll just close by saying, we do fully expect to spend every penny of that $123 million plus allocation by the federal deadline of December 2026. And on the one pager, we won't read through it all, but I figured you all might appreciate just an update that's a little bit more granular with regard to all of the wonderful results that we've been able to produce for constituents with these funds. And so really, when you look at the large placemat style document in front of you, on the right-hand side, you'll kind of see for all of our funding priorities exactly how many residents we've been able to support to date, how many small businesses we've been working with to date, how much infrastructure we've created, and so forth. So happy to answer questions about any and all of it, but figured that was that would be a helpful introduction, and very happy to answer questions.
I'll let you go first.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. I'm glad to hear the plan of taking any of the unallocated funds and putting it to the general fund by, what did you say, the first quarter of fiscal year 25?
Yep.
Putting into a special object, I guess one of my concerns there, not knowing any more than you just told, is kind of the transparency around that special object and what's going in there, what's coming out, how you're going to keep the council informed of the progress of spending down that additional funds from
Sure.
a generic special object.
Sure. So we will certainly, I think, provide an updated list. In the memo that was sent out on March 29th, I did include, just for, again, everyone's reference at that point, the list of projects that had large unobligated balances. Again, that was a point-in-time view. The list is more or less similar today, but some of these numbers have changed because a month has gone by, and so folks have been obligating and spending. But generally speaking, this list is still the same list that has the largest of the unobligated ARPA balances. So it's about 9 or 10 projects. You can see, again, this was as of March 29th. I can certainly provide you with the data on these projects as of today, but again, I think it will change between now and June 30th. But regardless, I think the point would be, we would certainly share the list on June 30th with everyone on council, so folks know, this is essentially what would be made up of that special object. And then, I think as an administration, we'll need to obviously figure out ultimately who's responsible for tracking and managing that stuff moving forward. That stuff is no longer part of ARPA at that point. So whether it will be me or whether it will be Brad Cannizzaro or Tim Rudd or someone else, will obviously, I think, let you all know. But we'd be looking to manage those funds like we do, all of our funded projects, making sure those have, still project management infrastructure in place and things like that moving forward. And we can report on the special object, on these special objects like we do the ARPA funds.
I'm just wondering, so the plan is for the unobligated or the unspent ARPA money will go into a special objects of expense.
The unobligated.
Unobligated.
Yeah, so if it's obligated today under ARPA, we would expect that those departments will continue to spend it as ARPA money. So, when something gets obligated, there's typically a contract that's been executed, or there's a purchase order for a specific good or service. That's what creates the legal obligation to spend the money. For a number of reasons, it might be difficult or administratively cumbersome for folks to use a different funding source at that point for a contract that's already been executed with a specific funding source. We can obviously evaluate all of that moving forward. So we're really talking about, today we've got $109.78 million obligated. So the unobligated balance today is basically $13 million. Like I said, we expect that to be closer, somewhere between 9 and 11 million on June 30th, just because of, anticipated obligations between now and the end of the fiscal year. For a lot of our projects, they continue to bid work. For example, like the water pump station projects are a very good example. They just completed the bid like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So we expect them, I think they've actually already executed the contract for that work. That work will start. Those are ARPA funded, that pump station project's ARPA funded. So for example, some of the obligations are in flight, I would say, but we do expect that number, like I said, to be somewhere between 9 and 11 million on June 30th. That's the money that would be shifted into the general fund, basically.
I have a question.
No, let me continue my thought here because that was, I sort of didn't really grasp everything here. So the unobligated monies, when do they have to be transferred into the special object?
I think we'd look to do it at the same time. So
what date were we talking about? Like June of next year?
Like July 1st.
Of this year?
At the start of the next fiscal year, yeah, because it's programmed as a part of our fiscal year 25 budget. So you'll see it, and I assume we'll be talking about it during the special objects meeting.
That unobligated monies will now that will need council approval?
Yes, I think you would approve it as a part of the budget.
So you would approve the whole, and there'd be a list of funding that has been obligated but hasn't been spent, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Because what about, we'll put that aside. What about monies that are obligated out there that haven't been spent? You expect them to be spent?
Yes.
Okay. Are we assured that, how do you monitor what's been spent and what hasn't been spent?
So we have a number of extensive, I'd say, processes to do that. We have monthly, in some cases quarterly project status meetings with each of the project teams that are responsible for implementing an ARPA project. We collect internal status reports. Obviously, we do analysis on the PeopleSoft data related to each of the projects from a spending and obligation perspective. We have to compile quarterly reports for the Treasury Department, which the research department helps us to do on a timely fashion. And so we're kind of constantly working with all of these project teams, basically to track and understand the status of their projects, to understand the status of their contracts, since the contracts create the legal obligation to spend the money. And so we're constantly running projections as well. That's, essentially how we were able to produce the graph that's on the placemat in front of you, where, again, we're sort of projecting in, September of 2024, that's the end of quarter one of the next fiscal year, we would be fully obligated, again, the 123,076, 929, fully obligated because of the proposal I'm talking about, where we just shift anything that isn't obligated yet into the general fund, consider ourselves
And
good.
the federal government, every other entity, community's been doing this, basically?
Well, not every community has the ability to do this. So, one of the things, again, kind of documented in the memos I've been sharing with you all, Treasury requires us and every community to basically calculate an amount of revenue lost attributable to the pandemic. Treasury provides the calculus for us to do this, so they give us the formula basically, and then we work with our finance department here to come up with our calculation. So we have to provide 4 years worth of calculations. We've essentially done that now every year for the last 4 years. The last calculation I think we completed at the end of calendar year 2023. So all told, using Treasury's calculus, we have, as a city, lost approximately $90 million in municipal revenue, again, according to the calculation that Treasury provides to us. So what that means for us is that there's a number of regulations that Treasury has in place for spending the ARPA money, and there's different categories that we have to spend it within, which put guardrails around us, right, in terms of how we can spend. One of the categories, which is called revenue replacement, is the most flexible of the categories. It basically gives municipalities the highest degree of discretion in terms of how we can spend the money.
Thus the special object.
Exactly, thus the special object. And so if you've determined that you have lost revenue due to the pandemic, you get to use up to that amount in that most flexible category. So because we've now calculated that $90 million in lost revenue, up till now we've only allocated, I think, about $62 million in that revenue replacement category. That includes, the 2 million we previously put into the general fund in the previous fiscal years. It also includes projects like the fire tower, for example, the fire training tower, which wouldn't otherwise be justified from an ARPA perspective in any of the other ARPA categories. But again, because there's this flexible revenue replacement category, we can do projects like that. So we have, about a $25 million delta in terms of that revenue replacement cap, and so that gives us the ability to use, that, whether it be 9 million, 11 million, we can then capture that as revenue replacement. We obviously have to report that we're using it for a specific purpose to the Treasury Department. So as we've done in years past, each of the 3 previous fiscal years, we've used money in the general fund.
See, I'm glad we're letting Treasury know.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering when Treasury shows up, maybe here, and they'll be able to account for all the money that's actually been spent.
For sure. Yeah,
Okay. So all these entities that have got money, we're confident in their accounting that we're going to be able to show in those Treasury agents.
we collect pretty specific data from, not just from internal city departments, but from our subrecipients. So as you all know, we do have many of our ARPA programs are actually administered via a subrecipient. Home headquarters, for example, is a good example.
I'm not worried about home headquarters, but I'm, the subrecipients.
Sure, yeah, they're just one of our larger ones.
Basically unprecedented, obviously, and I commend you for putting this all together because we've never got this amount of money, and obviously we need it. But I'm just wondering, everybody on this list, and I understand the obstacles for some of the, especially the infrastructure, like the infill project and all that. I understand, but some of the monies, I'll give you the Community Violence Intervention Program, that hasn't spent a dollar. That's going over to the special objects, right?
Well, so actually, that's one example where just in the last 4 weeks since between the memo and now, we've actually obligated about $900,000 of that money. So
Obligated, meaning you sign contracts with
sign
people?
contracts, yeah. So, and you all approved all of those contracts for community violence
Well, we did.
intervention and
Yeah,
everything else.
We did, of course we did, but we
Right.
didn't, nothing was spent.
Right, sure.
I mean, I guess so you could say those there were negotiations going on.
Correct.
Sort of like the,
Yeah.
Teamsters. I'm only kidding. So it's just some of that stuff, if you
Right.
keep us informed on that.
Yeah, but we do have mechanisms to collect information pretty much, like I said, from every internal department, but also from all of our subrecipients. So once we execute a contract with a subrecipient, let's say now with one of the newer ones under the Community Violence Intervention Program, they have to report a number of key metrics, including their spending, and they have to provide pretty detailed receipts and itemized invoices to the city before we'll reimburse them for actual expenditures. And in the case of like the community violence programs, for example, those are being administered reimbursably. So instead of giving them the money up front, we are waiting for them to submit receipts after they've spent so that we can check those, make sure they're in alignment with the contract, which is pretty standard grant management practice. And again, our research department works really closely with the departments to do all of that. Like we do with like our CDBG money, for example, which I think before ARPA was our single largest, federal source of funding. We've actually replicated a lot of their subrecipient monitoring practices. So we've got folks, Sami in the room, for example, who actually meets with each of those subrecipients on usually a quarterly basis, to sit down with them to check their files. You kind of have a checklist of all the things you need to do to monitor your subrecipients. Again, this is all based on kind of federal best practices for receiving large grants. And so we try to implement those practices, obviously, for all of our ARPA programs. But again, I think to your point, Counselor, transparency is super important. Being able to report back to you all is obviously really important, as well as to the Treasury Department, which is our funder in this case. And we do need to, I think, really track and have a high level of confidence that everyone, whether it's an internal city department or whether it's an external subrecipient, is spending the money, for the purpose that we've allocated it to them. And, importantly, to achieve the specific results that we are, funding them to achieve, whether it's serving a certain number of residents or, producing specific outcomes in the community.
I may have a couple questions. Thank you. So I just want to go into specifics. I want to thank Counselor for answering a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go to specifics. Northside Neighborhood Parks Improvement, we budget $300,000. We've only spent 21%. So does that balance still go for Northside Neighborhood Parks Improvement? Is it gonna stay there?
Yeah,
It's
so
not gonna be moved around?
No, so 100% of that budget has been obligated for those programs. So, I think that all of those parks improvements in the north side parks are going to be completed this summer. So obviously a lot of our parks improvements are subject to the construction seasons. So I think on the north side for those projects, that work was all started last summer. Right. And so that's where you see 27% of the budget has been spent. So that was on the work they did last summer. I think they're finishing up everything this summer. So we will expect to have the work completed in the north side parks before the end of this summer. We would expect all of that $300,000 to be spent, by the end of the summer, basically. But that's a case where the 100% of their budget is fully obligated today, so we don't need to move it around. We're going to just kind of keep it where it is.
So they're continuing working, I know.
They're just, continuing.
So I have one more question on line 41, Minority Business One Stop. We budgeted this money, nothing has been spent. As to why it's not been spent?
So, yeah, that's another one where, again, when we sent the report in March, it had not yet been obligated, but we've been working with, this is a project that's going to be implemented by the Syracuse Economic Development Corporation, by SEDCO. So as of last week, I got an update that the contract between the city and SEDCO was finalized. So I believe that $444,000 will be fully obligated and actually spent when the money transfers from the city account to the SEDCO account, probably in the course of the next 2 weeks.
Well, how much specifically are we doing? I mean, we're going to all the minority businesses throughout the city?
So we'd have to, talk to the SEDCO team about how they plan to administer the
Okay.
funds. I believe they're doing it in collaboration with the county, because I think the point for the MBE One-Stop program is to support a lot of the small business, minority-owned businesses that are trying to compete for some of the ID1 and Micron contracts.
Right.
So we're working closely with county contracting.
Because we have a lot here on the north side,
Right.
North Salina Street corridor. We
Yep.
have so many minority owners, and so we got to get the word out, any excess support they can get.
Absolutely,
'Cause they're
yeah.
not old
Eric
buildings.
Ennis will be a good person for you to
Oh, of
talk to
course.
about that.
I know Eric.
Well, he had to negotiate with himself
Eric.
between SEDCO and the Syracuse.
Right.
I know,
and
it's really
Economic
tough for him.
Development.
Yeah.
I know. Must have been difficult negotiation.
Take one hat on, put the other hat on.
That's good.
The team does a tremendous amount of outreach along with budget, since purchasing sits within budget, and that's where the contract ends up taking place when it's through the city. But to your point, we're constantly doing outreach. I think probably the biggest example would be the BIPOC Developer Summit that our business development team has held twice this year.
Right.
Which has drawn people, for us, it's focused on developers right here in Syracuse, so that minority developers and women developers, veteran developers have a chance to participate and build that wealth right here in Syracuse. But there's such a hunger for it that we have people from all over the state.
So there's a couple have asked me. One's a business owner on North State Street, has a restaurant. So he asked for help. Where do I, what department, if he had any questions?
So it depends on what he's looking for. If he's looking to contract, then he would go to Director Rudd's department for through purchasing. If he's looking for lending possibilities, just overall business engagement, that would be through Eric
Yeah,
Ennis.
it's like he's looking like business improvements of the building or sidewalk.
Absolutely. Have him talk to Eric Ennis or me.
Or through Eric.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because many of the minority-owned businesses, as I found, they're new to this country and they don't understand all how government works. So we have to explain. I do take the time to explain certain things, who to contact.
Yeah, and we've got team members that do outreach specifically for that work.
Right, and
Definitely.
help them with, if there's language barriers. Well, that's great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks a lot.
Commissioner, on the infill housing development, there's, so that would that be the near west side infill?
So the infill is that's related to all the different projects that we've got money into. So the most recent one that that is under construction right now is the Creekside Landing with Housing Visions.
Okay.
Yep.
And then what about Kirk Park Veterans Memorial? That's
Yeah, so
obligated.
Kirk Park, what we would anticipate doing there, so I think you all just passed an ordinance maybe 2 cycles ago awarding the $20,000 for their design work to their designer. So, and I just talked to Tony a few days ago. He's getting the requisition into purchase right now. So that $20,000 will be ARPA funded. Will pay that contract basically this summer with these funds, since you've already appropriated ARPA for it. The balance, though, obviously he needs to go through the whole design process. I believe he still needs to raise some money for the project because they are anticipating the project's going to be more than the $250,000 that we allocated. So we would then put the balance, so that's $230,000, into the special object. And so he'll be able to execute that project with city funding, hopefully do the rest of his fundraising from other sources. And that way, it might take another year or so to complete the project, maybe longer. But the the implementation of the construction project won't necessarily be an ARPA project in that circumstance.
And the Hiawatha Lake Wall, this is like, I almost have to wear a disguise to drive through Strathmore because I get questions on this all the time.
Sure. Well, I live in Strathmore, so I also get accosted
You get a
about
few,
this
too.
project.
Oh, so people know that
Oh,
you're
yeah.
the deal? Because I'll just send them to you.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. 99 Wellesley. Bring
Okay, we
bring
got it
a
down.
basket of goodies if you come. Yeah, so I talked to Mary about that one last week. It sounds like the project is moving along very well now that they've been able to start again with construction season. The complete work date on the current contract with the construction company is, I think, November of 2024. So that's going to be a project that likely continues through the rest of this calendar year. We are anticipating to spend the full $900,000. We will not be able to spend it all until the end of the calendar year because the work's going to obviously continue through November. But that is a project where I think they're pretty far along with their obligations. I think the project's almost fully obligated. And I believe Mary actually just submitted another purchase order in the last week. So I think they'll be 100% obligated by June 30th, and then they'll just have to spend the money.
Then I'm going to take a step back and go big picture again. So unobligated goes to the general fund.
Correct.
So now let's talk about that other category of obligated, not spent.
Yep.
And what are our safeguards to make sure that we're getting that spent to 100% and not just getting it to 100%, but making sure that it's being spent effectively? Because I see your Maxwell lanyard there, and we've looked at budgets and spending cycles, and often with grants in particular, much of the spending is towards the end of that period, and so it may or may not be being spent as effectively as it could if it were spread throughout. So how do we make sure that we get that spent to 100%, and how do we make sure that the 100% is actually doing what we want it to do rather than just spending it for the sake of spending it?
Yeah, so I think it all goes back to, again, kind of the project management and performance management structures that we've put in place for the entire portfolio. So again, we continue to meet with every single project team, if not monthly, bi-monthly or quarterly, to collect actual performance data, both in terms of the dollars and the cents, but also in terms of what's being produced for that money. That's how we're able to produce summaries like this. But we actually set goals and targets for all of our projects. The infrastructure ones are pretty straightforward, right? It's like build a play set at this park. Like, did you do it or did you not do it? But a lot of our service contracts are a little bit more complicated, right? Because we have to work with the service provider to figure out, okay, for $300,000, can you serve 100 constituents or 200 constituents, right? But we actually go through that process when we're in the planning stage for each project. So every subrecipient, for example, that we work with has a target when they start the work. And then monthly, we collect the data to see how are they doing against the target. So for example, with our urgent care program, which is funded by ARPA, we also fund that with CDBG money too. So we do a lot of urgent care work in our community. But I think we set a target of, 300 households being supported with urgent care home repair grants. And we know as of, today, how many of those people have actually been, helped. And so we work, that's part of the program monitoring activity that I was describing earlier. And the departments, obviously, that are ultimately responsible for these projects play a very active role, in the case of those home repair projects, obviously MBD and Michael's housing team, really oversees those projects on pretty much a daily basis. So if there's an issue with a subrecipient that wants to know, can I spend the money on a house in this census tract? Because some of our ARPA funds are, directed to specific census tracts, for example. We can answer all of those questions to make sure that they spend the money how they're supposed to hit the targets that we've set, but also in some cases we have to follow very specific rules about exactly where money gets spent. So we, we pretty much actively manage that, like I said, almost on a day-to-day basis in many cases because some of the regulations are very specific. And some of the projects don't require that degree of oversight, but.
So given that, why don't we just max out the 90 million back to the general fund of municipal loss? Or municipal revenue loss, so take some of the unobligated at this point and maybe only obligate 50% and put the remainder into the general fund, getting us up to the 90 million that you mentioned, which would have less strings attached, less reporting requirements, et cetera.
Well, we only have $10 million left, basically. And so that's kind of what we're doing with it. But, when we set out the plan back in 2021, June of 2021, we were in the thick of the pandemic. We had so much need in our community from a residential perspective, from a small business perspective, all of our community partners essentially, rallying around to ask for support in different ways. We had to work with council at that time and a lot of our community partners to figure out, what were the best uses of that funding. And so, we made decisions then, and we've largely stuck to our plan. If you compare how we've executed the ARPA funding and the projects we've brought to council for approval, it largely, like 98%, follows what was in the June plan. And at that time, we knew some of those projects and programs would be kind of quick hits. We'd be able to implement them in the first year. Some of them would be longer-term projects, like the housing project, like broadband. Those were going to take multiple years to implement, and we knew that then. So we sort of made a strategic set of decisions at that point to put some money in the general fund, right? Like put significant amounts of money in the general fund. I think 20 million that first year, maybe 19, and then 21 the second year. But we also selected 66 projects which span, families, infrastructure, economy, government, so that we could start to move the needle on an outcomes perspective. Honestly, the one other thing I'll just say, and then Tim can chime in with whatever else he wants, but, by using a project-based approach and selecting specific programmatic goals and outcomes we were trying to achieve with this money, and, because we knew the level of scrutiny and oversight that the federal government was requiring with ARPA, in some ways, choosing to do that and implement ARPA this way actually provides, I think, a very high degree of transparency to the community, as opposed to if we just put $90 million in the general fund, we don't necessarily report to the community exactly how we spend every dollar. This kind of forced us to, really do a detailed accounting where, we've been providing quarterly updates to council. We have a public-facing dashboard on the city's website, which gives, all of our constituents a viewpoint into how this money is being spent. I think it would have been less transparent if we had just done a very large budget grab, which I think at one point Director Rudd did want us to do, to give him credit for that idea. But we stayed the course, and we decided it was important to support these 66 projects plus our general fund.
2021, we didn't know what was going to happen.
True.
And we met. We didn't know where our sales tax revenue was, where that was going to be. We didn't know anything.
Yeah.
So I think
lots
Tim,
of uncertainty.
We were worried about paying the bills, and I think now, to Councilor Williams's point, maybe it's time to relook. I think it's important for government, especially local government, to be fairly nimble on things like that. And that's a good point. Where to make sure we let people know how we spend our dollars.
Absolutely.
And since some of this money is still out there, and we're seeming like we're doing and the federal government, is approving this, that we're going to make it local money, basically.
Yep.
Moving it to local money. I think we got to ask these questions. So.
Yeah, of course.
Just on the line of thinking, I think Jen did a lot to explain the context since the beginning of ARPA. but I guess I heard the question slightly different, like, why don't we just max out the 90 million now?
Right, correct.
And I think that's a fair point, but and there's moments where I'm of that mind, but it's a balance because there is, I guess, like, what is the pathway that's most practical? So there would be a bunch of work to unencumber that would be more work. So your point of what about the projects that are encumbered but unspent, that's a fair point. There is risk tied to those, and I think we all feel we have a good project management structure with the quarterly touch bases that will probably become monthly for projects that are lagging, and I think those touch bases will become more pointed as they approach like spending deadlines. But I think we just decided it would be more burdensome if we were to undo our plan, and best to stick with the plan except for the projects that were exceedingly slow.
What were they, any clawback provisions in any of these contracts? Certain dates?
I mean, generally, you know, it's every contract is so different. So we don't have like a standard clawback clause, like for example, in every ARPA project. But you know, we have
I mean, when
a lot of
CITA
our,
or CITA gives benefits,
Right.
there's a certain like time limit where
yeah,
those
oh yeah,
benefits
our
don't
contracts
exist.
all have time limits and
So there is clawback provisions.
yeah, sure. Well, yeah, if a contract is taking too long and it reaches its, you know, or it's approaching its expiration date, we either decide at that point, you know, are we going to extend the timeline on the contract or are we going to, you know, stop? I don't think we've actually decided to cancel a project from an ARPA perspective since we started this. And there have been very legitimate reasons why contracts have needed to be extended, like no cost extensions, right? But a lot of our home headquarters projects, for example, you know, weren't necessarily able to meet the original deadline set in the contract, but they're still doing great work. They're still getting money out the door. They're still getting homes repaired and new homes built. So, you know, we've extended those contract dates. And for the most part, I think that's been the case with all of our ARPA contracts. They've either met the contractual deadlines or they've needed a little extra time and we've granted the extension.
I just think that maybe, I mean, obviously, I think you've done a great job with this as far as putting all this together, because this was a new program. We didn't, you know, the money, and we sort of flew by the seat of our pants, and you're a good pilot on this. But I think we have to be cognitive of how we spend the money from now on. I think with the what we're facing as far as budgets go, obviously, I think a priority is for money like infill or something like that is, you know, directly relates to the tax revenue. Mm-hmm. You know, there's certain programs that, you know, if they're put in place, houses are built, they pay taxes on their houses and things like that. So I think we have to be cognizant of that. So that's all
I think we got it.
Checking with the north side to make sure.
Yes, I know. I'm getting more
Plugged into the north
response
side.
about the north side.
It's underway.
And I apologize for that. So, essence, so any unused money is going to stay here.
Any unused money?
All the funds. So we got to use it all.
We have to use it all. That's the name of the game. We want to spend every penny.
Oh, we got suggestions where we can spend that last shiny penny.
Well, yeah, we have, I think, as hopefully the materials provided indicate, you know, there's a plan to spend every penny. The plan is obviously well underway. You know, 90% obligated, 76% spent as of today. Yeah. You know, and so I think, and we've got a good plan, I think, to minimize our risk moving forward. We have to obligate the money, you know, by the end of this calendar year. So that's the very first deadline, is just making sure every penny is obligated. Right. We have more time to spend. Right. So,
well, this is like the WPA project, though. We're trying to rebuild our community.
You weren't around then.
No.
I think I read about that.
Okay.
At
So it was a great project. We built our city. And I think of all our parks, even our Parker parks, especially we have a Veterans Park on North Salina Street. You know, Yeah, they could spruce up, you got a few bucks, yeah, plant a few
Yeah.
flowers.
We've done some amazing work in our parks, I think.
I
You know,
know.
the,
That's our goal, is our parks. People
yeah,
enjoy
you know,
parks. That's what we gather.
I think Councilor Hogan was a great advocate in his previous role, you know, looking over parks, and ARPA has, you know, put a lot of funding into our parks, which has been, I think, a really big boon for the neighborhoods.
Well,
I
I'm
mean,
on the
actually, this
board.
administration has probably spent more, this federal administration spent more money on
Right.
the cities and the parks and
Yeah.
things that people use, and probably since Franklin Roosevelt. And
Yeah, it's
when Marty
exciting.
was working in the WPA.
So I'm on the board of Friends of Shoal Park, and they always put stuff in my ear. We're not shortchanged. Yeah, no, we were good.
Good.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor. Motion?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Do we have to?
Okay.
Second. Okay, you second that?
Yes, I'm the second.